The old man had been digging for 17 years, and the town thought he'd lost his mind somewhere in those dark passages beneath his property. Marcus Haywood was his name, though most people in Thornfield just called him the Mole when they thought he couldn't hear. He'd started the tunnels the year after his wife died, breaking ground in his basement with nothing but a pickaxe and a wheelbarrow. His neighbors watched him haul bucket after bucket of dirt and rock up from below, dumping it in great mounds at the edge of his 5-acre lot. They'd asked him what he was doing at first, back when people still talked to him at the hardware store or the post office. Building something useful, he'd say, and nothing more. The thing about Marcus was that he'd been an engineer before retirement, the kind who'd built subway systems in 3 major cities and knew more about load-bearing structures than anyone in their small Montana town would ever need to know. But grief does strange things to a person's mind, or so the neighbors whispered. His Ellen had been his whole world, and when the cancer took her, something in Marcus seemed to hollow out. He sold his consulting business, cashed in his retirement accounts, and started digging. At first, it was just a tunnel from his basement to his workshop, 100 feet through clay and stone. Then he dug another to his barn, then one to his root cellar. The tunnels branched and multiplied like roots seeking water. He installed electric lighting, proper ventilation shafts disguised as fence posts, even a small rail system for moving supplies. The town council got involved once, asking about permits and safety inspections, but Marcus had done everything by the book. The tunnels were his, on his property, engineered to standards that exceeded any local code. What's the point? His neighbor Jim Richardson had asked him 5 years in, standing in Marcus's driveway while the old man loaded more timber for tunnel supports onto a cart. "You planning for World War III or something?" Marcus had paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the autumn chill. He was 67 then, lean and ropey with muscle from the constant physical labor, planning for when something's needed. He'd said, "Better to have it and not need it than the other way around." Jim had walked away shaking his head, and that story made the rounds at the Copper Creek Diner for weeks. The Mole and his mad tunnels, the lonely old man who'd rather live underground than face the world that had taken his wife. But Marcus kept digging. He expanded the system every year, mapping it meticulously in leather-bound journals he kept in his study. Tunnels ran beneath 3 acres of his property now, some barely 4 feet high, others tall enough to stand in comfortably. He'd waterproofed them, insulated them, created emergency exits and ventilation systems that could sustain people for weeks if needed. He stockpiled supplies too, though he never talked about that. Food, water, medical supplies, blankets, batteries, fuel. His Social Security and pension checks went into the tunnels, quite literally, converted into goods and materials that disappeared beneath the earth. The town's opinion of Marcus had calcified over the years into a kind of bemused tolerance. He was the local eccentric, harmless enough, paying his taxes and keeping to himself. His tunnel system was a curiosity, something people mentioned to visitors from out of town. "Oh yes, old Marcus Haywood has been digging tunnels under his place for near 20 years now. Little touched in the head, but he's not bothering anyone." 17 years into the project, the tunnel system connected every structure on his property and extended in careful, surveyed lines toward the edges of his land. Marcus was 70, for now, moving slower but still sharp as a tack, still making improvements and reinforcements to his underground network. He'd started keeping chickens in a specially dug chamber with grow lights, growing vegetables in another section with hydroponic systems. He'd taught himself to build from YouTube videos and engineering manuals, You could house 50 people down there. His only regular visitor, a young surveyor named Chris Halstead, had remarked during an inspection Marcus had requested, just to make sure his math on some load calculations was still sound. 62, actually, Marcus had corrected. 65, if people don't mind being cozy. Chris had laughed, thinking it was a joke. It was November when the weather reports started getting strange. A polar vortex was descending from Canada, they said, combined with a massive Pacific storm system. The meteorologists used words like unprecedented and historic and potentially catastrophic. But Thornfield, Montana had weathered bad winters before. They had snowplows and generators and that hardy frontier attitude that said they could handle whatever nature threw at them. Marcus watched the forecasts with the focused attention he'd once reserved for structural engineering problems. He saw the models, the pressure systems, the temperature predictions. He'd lived through bad storms, blizzards that shut down the town for days, but something about this one made his engineer's mind calculate probabilities and worst-case scenarios. He went to the grocery store and bought extra supplies, filling his truck bed with bags of rice, canned goods, bottled water. The checkout girl gave him a knowing smile. "Stocking the bunker, Mr. Haywood." "Something like that," he'd replied. The storm hit on a Wednesday morning in mid-November, and at first, it seemed like just another heavy snowfall. Thornfield's 900 residents went about their business, confident in their preparation. Schools closed as a precaution. The grocery store did brisk business. People filled gas tanks and checked their generators. By Wednesday evening, the snow was falling so heavily that visibility dropped to near zero. The wind picked up, howling across the plains at 60, then 70, then 80 miles per hour. The temperature plummeted to 20 below zero, then 30, then 40. The wind chill factor pushed it to 70 below, cold enough that exposed skin would freeze in less than 5 minutes. Cold enough that breathing the air felt like inhaling knives. Thursday morning, the town woke to a nightmare. The storm hadn't weakened overnight. If anything, it had intensified. Snow drifts 20 feet high buried cars, porches, entire first floors of houses. The power grid failed in sections, then completely, as ice-laden lines snapped and transformers exploded. The backup generators at the emergency shelter, the old high school gymnasium, ran for 6 hours before the fuel lines froze solid. People died on Thursday. Old Mrs. Chen, trying to get from her house to her neighbors when her heat failed, made it 15 feet before the cold took her. She was found frozen solid in her driveway, hand outstretched toward the neighbor's door. Jim Richardson, Marcus's old neighbor, suffered a heart attack trying to shovel a path to his propane tank and couldn't get to the hospital. The hospital itself was running on emergency power, overwhelmed with cases of frostbite and hypothermia from people who'd tried to go outside for just a minute, just to check something, just to get to their car. The storm raged for 6 days without pause. The National Weather Service called it the worst winter storm event in recorded history for the region. Thornfield was cut off completely, roads buried under drifts that no plow could penetrate, even if the plows could have operated in the lethal cold. Helicopters couldn't fly in the whiteout conditions and sub-zero temperatures. The town was on its own. By day 4, houses without heat were becoming uninhabitable. People burned furniture, books, anything that would combust, but the cold was relentless, seeping through walls and windows, freezing pipes, turning homes into ice boxes. Families huddled together in single rooms, wearing every piece of clothing they owned, watching their breath frost in the air inside their own living rooms. The town's emergency coordinator, Sarah Vance, made a desperate decision. She knew about Marcus and his tunnels. Everyone knew the local joke, the old man's obsession. She remembered that Chris Halstead, the surveyor, had mentioned once at a town council meeting that Marcus's tunnel system was, architecturally speaking, a marvel of private engineering. She remembered Marcus saying something at that same meeting about proper insulation and climate control. Sarah made the trek to Marcus's house on foot, a journey of half a mile that took her nearly an hour, moving through tunnels of snow carved by the wind, crawling over drifts, convinced with every step that she would die before reaching his door. She'd wrapped herself in every piece of winter gear she owned, left her face exposed only a slit for her eyes, and still the cold found ways through the layers, numbing her fingers and toes, making her lungs ache with each breath. She collapsed on Marcus's porch, pounding on his door with the last of her strength. Marcus opened it to find her there, frost, covered and shaking. He pulled her inside without a word, got her down to his basement, down into the tunnels where the temperature was a steady 55 degrees, warm enough that Sarah started crying from the relief of it. "I need your help," she managed through chattering teeth. "People are dying." Marcus had been waiting, in his way, for 17 years for someone to need what he'd built. He'd imagined Ellen's voice sometimes while he was digging, telling him he wasn't crazy, that all this work would matter someday. He'd never really believed it himself. The tunnels had been grief, purpose, a reason to keep moving through days that felt empty without her. But now Sarah Vance was sitting in his underground chamber, thawing out, telling him that families were freezing in their homes and the town's shelters had failed. "How many people?" Marcus asked. "All of them," Sarah said. "Everyone who's still alive. Maybe 500, 600 people. We've already lost at least 30 that we know of." Marcus did the math in his head, calculating space and resources. "I told that surveyor I could fit 65 people down here. That was conservative. If we're talking survival and not comfort, if people are willing to be packed in, I can make it work." "You're serious?" Sarah stared at him. "You actually planned for this?" "I planned for something," Marcus said. "Didn't know what. Earthquake, war, some kind of disaster. Ellen used to say I worried too much about possibilities, but here's a possibility come true, I suppose." The evacuation began that same day. Marcus emerged from his tunnel entrance with Sarah, both of them bundled against the killing cold, and they made their way to the nearest occupied houses. The word spread block by block, passed through windows and shouted through walls. Marcus Haywood was taking people into his tunnels. The old mole's madness might save them all. They came in groups, families carrying children, elderly neighbors supported between younger people, everyone wrapped in layers that made them look like shapeless bundles of fabric stumbling through the Arctic hellscape that Thornfield had become. Marcus had them come through his house, down through his basement, into the main tunnel entrance. From there, his 17 years of work became a warren of survival. He'd sectioned off areas, directing the crowd with the organizational skills that had once managed construction crews on subway projects in New York and Chicago. Families with young children went to the chambers he'd dug near his barn, where the chicken coops and hydroponic gardens provided food sources and a bit of normalcy for scared kids. Elderly residents got the spaces closest to his house, where he'd installed the most comfortable amenities. The able-bodied adults filled in everywhere else, cramming into tunnels and chambers that Marcus had reinforced and expanded over nearly 2 decades. The number passed 60, 5 quickly, then 100, then 200. People kept coming, rumors spreading through the frozen town that Marcus Haywood's tunnels were warm and safe. Marcus kept organizing, kept fitting people in, calculating weight distributions and air flow rates in his head, adjusting ventilation, rationing supplies he'd stockpiled for years. By the end of the second day of evacuation, 512 people were underground. Nearly every survivor in Thornfield who could make the journey had made it. They filled Marcus's tunnel system to capacity and beyond. People sleeping shoulder to shoulder in passages lit by electric lights running off generators Marcus had installed over the years. The air smelled of too many bodies in too small a space, but it was warm. 55 degrees Fahrenheit, maintained by the Earth's natural insulation and Marcus's carefully designed heating system that used a combination of propane and geothermal principles. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, people lived. Marcus organized rationing schedules for his stockpiled food, set up a water distribution system, designated tunnel sections as latrines that could be sealed off and ventilated. He put people to work because idle hands in a crisis led to panic. Some operated the hydroponic systems under his instruction, harvesting vegetables. Others cared for children, ran lessons in the tunnel sections that had enough space, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. Sarah Vance worked alongside him, marveling at the scope of what he'd built. 17 years, she said one day, watching him check ventilation flow rates on a handwritten chart. "You spent 17 years building this, and the whole town thought you were crazy." "I was crazy," Marcus said quietly. "Probably still am. But Ellen used to tell me that the difference between crazy and genius is whether you're right. Guess we'll see which one I am when this is over." "You saved 500 lives. You're not crazy." Marcus shook his head. "I was just digging holes in the ground because I couldn't stand being in an empty house. If this storm helps people, that's circumstance, not planning. I never thought anyone would need this. I was just trying to survive losing her, one shovelful at a time." The storm finally broke on day 7, the winds dying down, the snow tapering off to flurries. The temperature remained brutally cold, but the National Guard was able to get through with snowcats and emergency supplies. They found Thornfield buried under snow, many houses destroyed or uninhabitable, but they also found 512 people alive, emerging from tunnel entrances across Marcus Haywood's property like survivors from some underground city. The news crews came after that, once the roads were clear. They wanted to interview the old man who'd saved a town with tunnels everyone had mocked. Marcus refused most requests, uncomfortable with attention, but he let Sarah do the talking. She told them about the 17 years of work, the precision engineering, the stockpiled supplies. She called Marcus a hero. Marcus just went back to his tunnels after the reporters left, checking for damage, making repairs where the weight of 500 people had stressed his carefully calculated structures. He found himself alone down there one day, standing in the central chamber where families had huddled together for warmth, and he could almost feel Ellen's presence, the way he had in the early years when he'd first started digging. "I hope you'd be proud," he said to the empty air. "I know you thought all this digging was just me running away from grief. Maybe you were right, but it turned out to matter after all." The town council wanted to name something after him, a park or a street. Marcus declined. Some of the families who'd sheltered in his tunnels wanted to pay him, to compensate him for the supplies they'd consumed. Marcus refused. Jim Richardson's widow came by one day, months after the storm, bringing a casserole and tears. "Jim used to say you were crazy," she told Marcus on his porch. "He told everyone about the tunnels, made fun of them. But you saved my kids. You saved my grandkids. I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry." Marcus accepted the casserole and told her there was nothing to be sorry for. "Jim wasn't wrong to think I was crazy. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am, but your family's safe, and that's what matters." In the years after the storm, Thornfield rebuilt. The disaster had put them on the map, the little Montana town that survived the worst blizzard in recorded history because one old man had spent 17 years digging tunnels everyone thought were pointless. Scientists came to study the storm's meteorological patterns. Engineers came to examine Marcus's tunnel system, amazed at the precision of its construction, the efficiency of its design. Marcus let them look, let them document his work, but he didn't change his routine much. He still spent time in the tunnels, maintaining them, improving them. He added a section that he made available as a community emergency shelter, properly registered and inspected, with supplies maintained by the town. But he kept most of it private, his underground sanctuary, the product of 17 years of grief, transformed into something that had, against all odds, mattered. He was down in the tunnels one spring afternoon, replacing some electrical wiring, when he heard footsteps in the passage behind him. He turned to find a young couple with a child, people he recognized from the storm but didn't know well. "Mr. Haywood," the woman said, "we're sorry to intrude. Your door was open, and we thought—" "It's fine," Marcus said. "Something I can help you with," the man spoke up. "We wanted our daughter to meet you. She was just 3 during the storm, doesn't remember much. But we wanted her to know who you are, what you did. We wanted her to understand that when the world seems dark and people tell you you're crazy for preparing for the worst, sometimes the crazy ones are the ones who save everyone." The little girl, maybe 6 now, looked up at Marcus with wide eyes. "Did you really dig all these tunnels yourself?" "I did," Marcus said. "Took a long time." "Why?" It was a child's question, direct and seeking truth. Marcus knelt down so he was eye level with her. "Because when someone you love goes away, you need something to do with your hands and your heart. I dug because I was sad. But sometimes the things we do when we're sad end up helping people we never expected to help. Does that make sense?" The little girl nodded seriously, then hugged him, quick and impulsive the way children do. Marcus felt something in his chest crack open, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The couple thanked him and left, and Marcus sat in his tunnel for a long while after they'd gone, thinking about Ellen, about grief, about 17 years of digging that everyone had called madness. Maybe it had been madness, but it had also been purpose and survival, and in the end, salvation for 512 people who might have frozen in their homes if one old man hadn't been too heartbroken to stop digging. Marcus stood up, picked up his tools, and got back to work. There were always improvements to be made, always preparations for the next disaster, whatever form it might take. He was 75 now, and his back ached more than it used to, but his hands were steady and his mind was clear. The tunnels stretched out around him, a maze of passages that told the story of a man who'd survived loss by building something that saved others from losing everything. Somewhere above him, spring was coming to Thornfield, snow melting, flowers beginning to push through the earth. Down here in the steady 55-degree air of his underground world, Marcus Haywood worked on, no longer quite so alone, his tunnels transformed from a symbol of madness into a monument to the stubborn human refusal to give up, even in the darkest cold.